Hello and welcome back to MULCH. How are you? We've had some fabulous weather here in Leeds over the past week. The sun's been out, I've removed layers when I've been working in the field, and the weeds are appearing thick and fast, which means that the soil is nice and warm. It feels like the growing season is finally underway. And when the season begins in earnest, something else begins to appear as well. The feeling that we should be doing everything at once. Seed trays everywhere, sowing schedules that feel endless, and the quiet worry that if we don't succession sow perfectly, the whole season might fall apart tomorrow. That's the spiral I'd like us to step out of today. This week in Grow Club, we've been talking, amongst other things, about having a continuous supply of flowers for the season and when to do what to achieve that. It's led to a number of questions, and one of them has been about succession sowing. So, have you ever asked yourself, does succession sowing really make sense on a UK flower farm? Or do I have to succession sow to have a successful flower farming season? This episode sits firmly in the second O of our roots framework. It's all about openness to change. Openness to change asks us to question the systems that we've been told we should follow and ask whether they genuinely serve the way we grow flowers, the climate we grow them in, and the lives we're trying to sustain alongside our businesses. I'm going to repeat that. And the lives that we're trying to sustain alongside our businesses. Before we get started, I want to say something really quite clearly, because this episode may challenge a piece of advice that circulates widely in flower farming circles. Succession sowing is often talked about as if it's the secret to having flowers all season. But in my experience, misunderstanding succession sowing is one of the fastest ways to create overwhelm on a small scale to medium scale flower farm. So today we're going to look at a different approach to succession sowing or succession planning on your flower farm, and how an openness to change might help us to build steadier, more resilient growing seasons. I'm feeling pretty attached to definitions as a starting point for thoughts and actions at the moment, because when advice becomes common in an industry, the words we use sometimes drift away from their original meaning. So before we talk about succession sowing in practical terms, I want us to return to what the word succession actually means. Because when we understand the word properly, the pressure around it often begins to dissolve. So I took a moment to look up a formal definition of succession. These are the two definitions that are most helpful to our work as flower farmers. Number one, a number of people or things of a similar kind following one after the other. And number two, the process by which a community of plants and other organisms changes gradually, giving way to a sequence of community types that is predictable in a given type of habitat until a stable stage is reached. I'd like to pick out the following words or word phrases from these definitions for us to work through in today's episode. The first one, things of a similar kind. The second, changes gradually. Number three, predictable sequences. And the fourth, stable change. Those words are important because none of them suggest frantic repetition. These suggest gradual change, predictable transition, and eventually stability. And stability, not constant replication, is what builds resilience on a flower farm. So there are two reasons to be having this conversation now. One is because that word overwhelm is floating around a lot in the British and European flower farming world And it always does at this time of year in particular, because there is genuinely plenty to be getting done. The second is because I would love for us to consider what succession sowing or succession planning really looks like in the context of sustainable flower farming. Any of you who've downloaded or the business planning module or who've worked with me will know that I consider sustainability on our flower farm to be about more than the soil, the ecosystem and nature. It's also about us as flower farmers and our ability to do the work day after day, week after week, month after month, in what is quite honestly a grueling and long season every single year. When we design systems that require constant input and constant correction, we eventually run out of capacity. So part of sustainable flower farming is designing growing systems that support us, not systems that quietly and gently exhaust us. So as we dig a little deeper into this episode, I want you to think on your own needs as much as you think about your customers' needs. Because when you look after yourself as a grower, you do better work for your customers. Okay, so the reason that I've picked out these phrases, things of a similar kind, changes gradually, predictable sequence, stable change, from the definitions of succession is because I would like us to work backwards. The opening question that I often ask is, what are we trying to achieve on our flower farms? This question is important because it lends itself to the dictionary definition. What we want is flowers and foliage in the form of a reliable flow of flowers, not a static production line. And we want that to be from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, in the right quality, in the right quantities for our customers. What we also want is assurance. The reason that we covet this word succession is because it offers a sense of security that if we reach the holy grail of the perfect succession plan, with that comes the confidence to sell and market our flowers harder so that we can create sufficient income to support the parts of our finances that we do or that we intend to fund with our flower farming businesses. The thing about stability and consistency as a flower farm is that it's not the same as being the same all year round. And so it's almost a fallacy, dare I say it, for that succession plan to be associated with that immediate confidence. Often when I see flower farmers talking about succession sowing, what they're referring to is having a continuous supply of the same flower across the season. This lends itself to offering a supply or a service that replicates the Dutch system, where you can have tulips all year round if you really want to. However, it doesn't play to the strength of true seasonality, which is the strength of small to medium scale flower farms in the UK and in Europe. As small and medium scale flower farmers, we can't compete with industrial systems by copying them. We compete by doing something different, and in this case, that's producing a succession through transition rather than repetition. It's certainly not novel or new knowledge for me to say that hardy annuals, for example, do better when they've been overwintered or when they're sown in early spring. That's the cool season theory, most known as the work of Lisa Mason-Ziegler. And that's not to say that you can't grow hardy annuals for peak summer. But it does mean that you should expect fewer stems that are shorter and potentially with fewer blooms per plant, if that's what you choose to do, because the conditions that they've grown in to bloom in August and September aren't suited to getting the best out of those particular plants. If the intention is to achieve a steady state or consistent flower output, succession sowing to have the same flower for a whole season will potentially make you work harder than you need to. And when you've worked harder than you need to, you get overwhelmed. Practically, in the Northern Hemisphere, we're at the beginning of our growing calendar, so I'd urge you to review your sowing plans in the context of what's in the ground already and ask whether every succession that you have planned is going to work hard for you in your space, or whether you're going to have to work hard for it. So, if we're not aiming to achieve the same varieties available across the whole season, what is the intention? Well, the definition says that succession changes gradually. What does that mean in flower farming terms? Well, it means that the look and the feel of the flowers may stay the same, but the flowers themselves, in terms of what we offer to achieve that for our wedding couples or our wholesale customers or bouquets, changes. So white garden style froth in early spring, for example, would be spirea. It's hesperus in late spring. It's orleia in late spring to early summer. It's galenia and amimajus in early summer. And moving through on our flower farm to things like centranthus in kind of September, heading towards October. These are just some examples of what white froth might be. The key thing is that the flower changes, and as one starts, the other finishes across the season steadily. It gives the same style, it gives the same feeling of light, airy, movable, wavy froth. But it's not done through repeated successions of amimajus, which is the classical flower that many of my florist customers might ask for. This, to me, is what succession really looks like. Not the same crop repeatedly and endlessly sown, grown and cut, but the same feeling, the same palette, the same design language carried forward by different plants as the season unfolds. That kind of succession is both beautiful and far less exhausting to grow. There are so many reasons not to just aim for a steady succession of amimajus across the season. But if I were to name just one, I'd say this. To keep your customers coming back for more and to stop them from getting bored of what you offer and seeking excitement from elsewhere, you need to be able to provide the look in a way that moves with time. And to offer a second reason, openness to change also means allowing ourselves to let go of the idea that the season should look the same all the way through. Nature doesn't repeat itself in that way, it evolves, and our flower farms can evolve with it. As a sustainable flower farmer, I seek to work with nature. And nature offers change that I'm excited by every time that I spot it. And this excitement in nature changing around me is one of the things that keeps me going and stops me from getting bored. If you pay attention to our Instagram, you'll notice that I'm really quite fickle, or I might appear to be quite fickle. And that's because my favourite flower changes every time that something new appears. It's not me being flighty. I only grow flowers and foliage that I love. And so I'm genuinely excited the minute that something new is ready, meaning that I'm never bored. A really good flower farming friend of mine said that she doesn't succession sow at all because she gets bored of cutting the same thing over and over and over again. And that really made me think. Okay, I can hear you asking, Rebecca, that's all lovely. It's a podcast. You're giving some wonderful thoughts and advice and whatever you wish to call it. However, do you, Rebecca, of Silver Grey Foliage, succession sow? And I'd say no. I do 2 sowings of some, but definitely not all of my hardy annuals. And I do sowings of 1 or 2 of my half hardy annuals more than once. I don't do many, and the reason for that is that it only really extends my cutting window for those particular flowers by a couple of weeks. The difference in the length of the cutting window really isn't huge, and it's this knowledge that has really made me consider whether it's worth doing at all. Reaching a point where I was willing to accept shorter cutting windows for some half-hardy annuals and some hardy annuals was really uncomfortable. But the outcome is that I do less work for flowers that I don't mess. Are there any exceptions to my approach? The only exceptions, in my view, and this is my view, are one and done flowers. Things like stocks. I don't grow stocks. I love them, but I don't grow stocks. And things like sunflowers, which at best have a couple of weeks as a cutting window. And I'm doing sunflowers this year, so I'm doing them this season, but only because I had seed to use up. I'm not sure whether I will do them again next year. Ask me, when can you ask me that? You can ask me that in October, when I've completed the beginnings of next year's sowing schedule. So, if succession sowing is something that's been sitting on your mind as you've written your sowing schedule, or if you've started sowing and you're wondering how on earth you're going to keep it up all season, I'd encourage you to pause for a moment and ask yourself a slightly different question. Not how many successions do I need, but what does a steady season actually look like on my flower farm? And be willing for that to be smaller this year than it will be next year. Because steady means that the flowers keep coming, the varieties change, the colours shift, and the textures move with the season. It means that the work stays manageable. The flowers stay beautiful and fabulous quality, and your customers still have something to be excited about. And if that means sowing a little less, rather than sowing a little more, that might just be the most resilient decision that you make this season. I'll be back next week with another episode of Mulch, encouraging you, as ever, to get on and grow. Rebecca.